Hey, good morning. Today we're going to be working on adding integers. That's what you're kind of doing with your assignments through Connexus. We went over this with, I believe I did this with my 7th and I reviewed it with my 8th graders yesterday during our live lessons. So you've seen some of the adding already, which is good, but I wanted to go ahead and record a video for those who missed that, and also for those who just need to see it again because it is a tough concept. Yesterday we did talk about additive inverses. We'll probably go back into that, but I don't want to spend as much time on that right now. Let's skip straight to our number lines here. So one of the things we did yesterday is we used number lines to sort of model addition and subtraction of integers. In the classroom, there's a couple of other different models that I've used in the past, but this seems to be the easiest way to show you in like on a computer online environment. There are other ways I could do it. But we'll try this first and see how it goes. All right, so we lost our lesson here. Let me pause the video and get it back up. All right, don't know what happened there, but here we are. We have it back. All right, on the first play of their drive, a football team loses 8 yards. So we did this exact same problem yesterday, and what we talked about was that if we're losing 8 yards, the integer we would use to model that is a -8, and that's right here. And we say that because he lost 8. If he's losing something, it's not an 8 yards he's gaining. It's not a +8. We would have to use a -8 to model that because it's losing. Then the next play, they gain 3 yards. So for that play, we're using a +3. They gain 3 yards. So basically, what the football team did is they had 8 yards they lost, -8, but then they added 3 because that was positive. So if I were going to model a problem like this, I would say that would be -8 plus 3. To look at this on the number line, we would say, all right, let's start at 0. 0 is like where they started. That's your line of scrimmage. They put a star there. Move this out of the way. Now, then what they did was, you can see some arrows here, they counted over. They said, all right, well, the first thing we did was they lost 8 yards, so they went back 8. And whenever you're losing or going back in the negative direction, as a negative, you always move to the left. So you can see these little arrows, I'll trace them, going 8 to the left from 0. Always start at 0. All right, so they lost the 8. We've already modeled that part. But then they added +3 because they gained 3 afterwards. So when they added that 3, they're starting at the 8 because they've already lost 8. So they're starting here. And then they gain 3. 1, 2, 3. I like to use straight lines a lot for these. 1, 2, 3. Where did they end up? At -5. They lost 8, gained 3. They ended up at -5. So one thing I notice here when I'm dealing with these integers, these numbers with signs here, is that one of the numbers was negative, the other was positive. And what happened was, with the negative, we went back this way. But then with the positive, we had to go back over some of what we did with the negative. Basically, we worked our way back to 0. And what happened was, to get this 5, we ended up subtracting 8 minus 3 equals 5. And so that gave us the answer. This makes a lot more sense if I can get out what, I like to use integer chips and show you, and that may be what we need to do eventually. But you can see why you're subtracting. What you're really subtracting is what we call 0 pairs, but we may have to get into that. We'll see what we can do without that. But you can see on the number line here that we ended up going back towards 0, and that's why we subtracted. And since I went further in the negative direction, the 8 was a negative. I went further that way. The 3 was a positive. The 3 didn't get me all the way back to 0. The sign ended up being negative. So what we talked about yesterday, and we tried to take a little more time, whatever we had, is we said if the signs are different, and we're talking about addition, we always subtract and take the sign, the larger number. Now, that's a little deceptive, and I'll explain why, but it should work. So first of all, the signs are different, we subtract, and that's absolutely true. We went 8 one way, 3 the other way. We're going to have to subtract to figure out where we ended up. So we did 8 minus 3, and we got 5. Here's what I mean by larger number. What I really mean is the number with what we call the largest absolute value. That means the largest distance from 0. 8 is 8, negative 8 is 8 spaces from 0. 3 is 3 spaces from 0. And so since we went further from 0 in the negative direction, it's going to end up with a negative sign. The 3 wasn't enough to get it to the positives. If you just think of it like look at it and say, all right, 8, if they were both positive, 8 would be bigger than 3. So it's going to be negative since the 8 was negative. That's probably the easiest way to look at it. All right, let's move on to another example. All right, on the first play of their drive, a football team loses 5 yards. So since they're losing 5 yards, I'm going to model that with a negative 5. Now they're going to add some other movement to this. So on the next play, they lose 3. So I'm going to put parentheses because I like to, since I'm putting in a negative here, but for losing, I want to separate that plus sign from the negative, so I like to use parentheses. So in this case, they lost 5, and then they lost 3 more. So we want to know their total yardage. So once again, I'm starting at 0. We're going to call that the line of scrimmage in this case, since it's a football example. And they lost 5, so I'm going to go back 5 in the negative direction because they lost 5. All right, and then, last time we said, all right, they gained 3, so we went up 3, or they gained some amount. This time they lost more, so they're at negative 5 already, but they lost 3 more. So I have to go 3 more back. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, yeah. So they end up at negative 8. So you can see here we went some in the negative direction, and then we went more in the negative direction. And that's because they had the same sign. They were both negatives. We didn't go back, so we didn't end up subtracting anything because we're not backtracking. So the one thing that, I honestly don't remember where we got with each set of students, but the one thing that we talked that some of us got to yesterday was that if the signs are the same, we actually end up adding. Even though they're both negative, we add. And you can see on the number line why we add. We went 5 one way, and then we kept going that same direction. We went 3 more. So we add the numbers and keep the sign. So you can see that right here. We had negative 5, negative 3 more. We end up, and I moved the thing some, but we ended up at negative 8. So we added the 2 numbers, 5 plus 3 is 8, and since they're both negative, we kept moving that negative direction and ended up being negative 8. Skip that one. Okay, so this is another similar thing, similar type of problem. All right, Jessica spends $8 to eat lunch. So since she's spending money, we generally think of spending money as a negative because she lost $8 when she spent it. Now she's going to add some other amount to that. Now she's spending another 3. So once again, she's spending it, so I'm going to put a negative 3. It's just like the problem we had before. She spent 8, she spent 3 more. Well, altogether, she spent $11. And since she spent it, I'm going to say she's at negative 11. She lost $11 from whatever she started with. The numbers were the same sign, so I added and I kept that sign. She lost $11. So here are our rules that we just discussed. When we're adding integers, if they have the same sign, we add the numbers together and we're going to keep that sign. So we just did some examples like that. You can see that. And then number 2, if we add 2 numbers and they have different signs, we subtract the 2 numbers, and whatever number was kind of look the biggest, we take the sign of that number. So you can look at the examples in the bottom here. My bad, sorry about that. Let's get that closed. You can look at the examples on the bottom. They subtracted the numbers. 5 minus 3 is 2. And since we went more in the positive direction, 5 is bigger than 3, it ends up being a positive 2. And then the exact opposite happened there. All right, so here's some examples we can work through together. Jeez, this is, I don't know. Got it back again. It never does this while I'm teaching. For some reason, when I'm doing it here, making a video, it keeps wanting to close. So let's go through the examples. So all I'm going to do for adding integers when there's an addition sign between them is look, and that's the case here. I'm going to look at the numbers, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. So I notice that I have a -1 and a +4. So I'm going to subtract because they're different signs. 4 minus 1 is 3. And since the 4 is a bigger number than a 1, I'm going to take that positive, and it's going to be +3. I'm going to do the next one. I have a +7 and a -3. They're added together. I have a plus sign. Since they're different signs, I'm going to subtract. 7 minus 3 is 4. And then since the 7 is a larger number than a 3, I'm going to take the sign of the 7, which is a positive. And notice I don't put a positive. If it's positive, we just know that it's positive. We don't have to actually put that. Looking at the next one, I have a -2 and another -2. So since the signs are the same, I'm going to add. I went 2 one way, I went 2 more the next way. So we end up with 4. And since they're both negative, it's going to be -4. All right, and the last one, we have a +6 and -9. Since the signs are different, we subtract. 9 minus 6 is 3. And the 9 is a bigger number than a 6. So there are more negative numbers than there are positives. That means that the final answer is going to be negative.